All right, let's unpack this. Have you ever noticed how a child, sometimes as young as 5, can grasp truly complex philosophical ideas,
Mm-hmm.
while, some adults might struggle with what seem like much simpler concepts,
Yeah, it's fascinating.
or how someone can become a mathematical whiz without ever setting foot in a traditional classroom?
Right, like Ramanujan.
Exactly.
Mm.
When I first encountered the research we're diving into today, it was a real aha moment for me. Changed how I thought about learning.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely. I think you'll find it just as eye-opening. Our source for this deep dive comes from excerpts of Shiva Narayan Takshilapage's research on age-independent cognition, the writer-learnography revolution.
Groundbreaking stuff.
Totally. So we're here to explore this new way of thinking about cognitive development, the idea that brilliance isn't really tied to age, but to something called writer-learnography.
Yeah, and traditionally we've thought about cognitive growth in these really fixed stages, like Piaget or Vygotsky laid out.
Right, like steps on a ladder, you expect certain abilities at certain ages.
Exactly, but this research kind of says, hold on a minute.
And what's really interesting is how advances in neuroscience are backing this up, right? Especially motor science.
Precisely. That's a key part. The research indicates that cognitive development is actually incredibly plastic, way more flexible than we thought.
So not just age.
Not just age. It's shaped critically by our environment, sure, but also how we engage with tasks, our motivation, even specific ways our brain rehearses information.
All right.
And this just opens the door to a whole new model where, academic learning really can transcend age.
So if the old age-based thinking is maybe too limiting, what's the alternative? This writer-learnography you mentioned.
Yeah, so the core idea, yeah.
What does that actually mean for how we learn, how knowledge gets transferred?
Well, writer-learnography emphasizes self-directed learning. But crucially, it involves active motor practice, like physically doing things.
It's like active practice.
And repetitive engagement, doing it over and over, but actively. That's how you build what the research calls brain pages.
Brain pages. Okay.
Yeah. The method suggests that cognitive functions develop based on experience, not just age. It's facilitated by structured learning tasks and really active brain engagement. That's what creates these brain page maps and modules.
So what exactly is a brain page? You mentioned it's about actively transforming information. Does that explain why just like reading a textbook often doesn't cut it
Yeah.
compared to maybe teaching it?
That's a great way to put it. Think of a brain page as, well, the paper calls it an invisible book of the mind, like writing notes right into the brain's structure.
Wow, okay.
It's a memory architecture. It forms not when you just passively absorb info, but when you actively transform it into knowledge you can use, repeat, reconstruct.
So it's not just recall.
No, not passive recall.
Right.
It's the active reconstruction of knowledge.
Real.
And that happens through focused, motor-rich tasks. That's why brain pages lead to long-term retention and adaptive learning, much more than, say, just taking notes or rereading.
Okay, that makes sense. And the paper gives some pretty compelling examples, right? I was really struck by the case of Bhagwat, a 5-year-old.
5 years old.
Yeah.
And demonstrating what they call advanced philosophical cognition.
Mhm.
Not just memorizing verses from the Bhagavad Gita, but getting the abstract meaning, the spiritual reasoning. It's kind of mind-boggling.
It really is. And then you have historical figures like Srinivasa Ramanujan,
The mathematician.
right? Mathematical genius dealing with incredibly complex ideas like infinite series, partition theory, all without formal instruction,
Just,
basically.
that's incredible.
These cases are strong evidence,
Right.
Real-world examples of this non-linear, age-independent cognitive growth.
Mm-hmm.
It suggests that when learning is rooted in intense focus,
Okay.
consistent motor engagement like writing or calculating,
Mm.
and deep rehearsals, it can absolutely lead to early or, super accelerated cognitive development.
So how does that work physically? How does this writer approach this motor engagement actually change the brain? Is it really like a construction site, like the paper says?
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And can you give an example of internal rehearsal? How is that motor driven if you're not moving? Okay, yeah. So the brain is like a construction site. It's constantly being built and rebuilt, powered by focus, motor activity, and that internal rehearsal. Brain imaging studies show this pretty clearly.
Right.
Motor engagement just lights up way more brain areas than passive listening does. When you're physically doing something, writing, drawing, solving, even just mentally walking through steps, key areas work together.
Which areas are we talking about?
The motor cortex, basal ganglia, cerebellum for coordination, hippocampus for memory, prefrontal cortex for planning. It's like a whole symphony.
Okay.
This makes learning active, makes cognition almost a physical process, like a dance, enhancing how you process and apply knowledge. That's the motor science connection.
And the internal rehearsal part.
Right. Think of a chess player mentally playing out moves.
Okay.
Or a musician running through a piece in their head. There's no physical movement, but the brain regions for planning and executing those movements are active. They're engaging motor pathways internally. That's a motor-driven task, even without moving a muscle.
Got it. So this leads to that cognitive paradox that research mentions, that a 5-year-old could potentially be more cognitively developed in some ways than a 25-year-old.
Exactly. Especially with prodigies who focus intensely on one thing.
And the flip side, a 25-year-old could have the cognitive capacity of a child if they haven't had the right kind of learning exposure.
Yes, if their learning has been very limited or mostly passive, it really makes you question things.
It does. So what's the big takeaway from that paradox for us, for how we should approach our own learning?
Well, it forces us to ask, what really allows someone to gain advanced abilities, regardless of when it happens? The paradox challenges that whole age equals ability idea.
Right.
It strongly supports writer learnography principles. It suggests the intensity and direction of your focus matter way more than your chronological age. Like the paper says, the brain does not count birthdays. It counts experiences.
I love that line, counts experiences. So this has huge implications for education, obviously. The research contrasts these brain page school models with traditional talking school systems.
Yeah, that's a major point.
How different are they really in terms of impact?
Well, the research suggests cognitive development can often stall or at least slow down in systems that rely too heavily on just listening, memorizing facts, verbal instruction, what they call talking schools.
Which is a lot of schools.
Yeah, often is, yeah. These approaches often don't engage the brain's motor pathways enough, so you get slower, maybe shallower cognitive growth.
Okay.
Writer learnography, on the other hand, pushes for active, task-driven learning environments, ones designed specifically to build those brain pages.
So if talking schools aren't great for building brain pages, what does a brain page school look like? They mentioned a miniature school model. How is that different from just, regular group work?
Yeah.
And why is it supposedly better for deep cognitive rehearsal?
Good question. The miniature school isn't just group work. It's conceived as a small, really self-contained unit. Students become genuinely self-driven learners, but also small teachers.
The teaching aspect.
Exactly. Unlike some group work where roles might be fuzzy, here, leadership, responsibility, peer-to-peer teaching, it's all highly structured. It mimics real-world complexity.
Okay.
And that forces learners into deep cognitive rehearsal because they have to explain, guide, and solidify the knowledge to teach it. It supports that idea of the brain as a constructor of meaning.
Right. Building it brick by brain page.
Brick by brain page, block by module, exactly. It's bottom-up construction.
That makes a lot of sense. Actively teaching forces you to structure your own understanding.
Yeah.
What about the one-day, one-book model and cycloside rehearsal? Can you unpack those quickly?
Sure. The one-day, one-book model is about deep immersion, focusing intensely on one single, meaningful source, a book, a complex problem, whatever.
Quality over quantity.
Precisely. It fosters deeper reflection and abstract thinking by concentrating cognitive effort. And cycloside rehearsal, that's about strengthening the circuits.
Okay.
It's not just casual revision. It's repeated motor-based practice. Could be writing, drawing diagrams, solving related problems, even that focused mental simulation we talked about.
All right, the internal rehearsal.
Yeah. That repetition builds really strong, efficient brain page loops.
Yeah.
It makes the knowledge almost automatic, procedural. It's literally rewiring for deeper understanding and faster recall.
Wow. Okay, so pulling this all together, what does this mean for you, the listener, right now? It sounds like cognitive development isn't this fixed staircase we climb slowly based on age. It's more like dynamic scaffolding, something we actively build.
That's a great way to put it. A field you cultivate through focus, effort, repetition, task engagement.
And this research seems to be saying the potential for, brilliance or profound development is there in all of us.
Yeah.
Regardless of age.
Yes, absolutely. As long as the engagement is there, the potential is active when task engagement is high. Neuroplasticity doesn't just switch off.
So the evidence seems pretty clear then. Brilliance isn't age-locked. It's unlocked through how we learn the tasks, the focus, creating these brain pages.
Exactly. So whether you're a parent, an educator, shaping policy, or just learning something new yourself, the call to action here is really to look beyond passive learning.
Right.
Empower yourself, empower others with Learning that is focused, motor-driven, active, a knowledge transfer that really engages the brain.
It definitely prompts a final, maybe provocative thought for everyone listening. The question maybe isn't how old are you, but how are you learning?
That's it.
Every single learner holds this potential to shape their own cognitive destiny, no matter the age.
Absolutely.
So yeah, go forth and build those brain pages.